right, everybody, please take your seats. Brilliant. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Korean Butler, and I'm the director of the Global Economy and Finance program at Chatham House. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to this morning's event, which Chatham House is hosting in collaboration with the FCDO on sanctions as a foreign policy tool. Sanctions have long been a critical instrument in foreign and security policy, but have become much more prominent since Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the unprecedented sanctions adopted by the G7 in response to this. Sanctions have been and are being applied in a very wide range of circumstances around the world and with multiple objectives. And there's a continuing debate as to how effective they are in these different situations and with these different purposes. The UK has long played a role in the design and deployment of sanctions, linked in part to its role as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. But the UK's departure from the EU and the response to Russia's attack on Ukraine has led to a major restructuring in the UK government's sanctions effort. So the new UK sanctions strategy, titled Deter, Disrupt and Demonstrate, which was launched at the end of last month, is very timely. And it provides us with an excellent opportunity to delve into both the broader debates on when and how to use sanctions, as well as the UK government's specific approach to these issues. So just to run through the order of play today, we will kick off with a keynote address by our principal guest, the FCDO Sanctions Minister, who I will introduce properly very shortly. This will then be followed by a discussion between myself and the Minister. And both the Minister's speech and the discussion will be on the record. And we'll be posting a video of it on our website afterwards. The Minister will then be leaving the platform, and we have a brief pause while we set up for our expert panel. The panel will then discuss the UK strategy and the broader questions around sanctions, both policy and implementation. However, in contrast to the Minister's speech and discussion, the panel will be under the Chatham House rule. We're in Chatham House, that bit will be under the Chatham House rule, and that means that you can use the content of what is said, but you cannot say who said it or where it was said. So thank you very much. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, who is the Right Honourable Anne-Marie Trevelyan, MP, Minister of State for the Indo-Pacific, and the Leeds Sanctions Minister at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And Minister, thank you very much for being with us. There's a great deal of interest, as you can see, in what you have to say, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's great to see so many of you here. It's always nice when your specialist subject is one that other people find interesting as well. And thank you very much indeed for Chatham House for hosting us today. And as Corinne said, as you know, last month we published our first UK sanctions strategy. So I suppose the question is, why now? Because we've been busy getting on with sanctions for a while. Well, there are a number of really good reasons why. First of all, as we know, our world sadly is becoming more uncertain and dangerous, marked by hostile state behaviour, terrorist organisations, cyber threats, criminal gangs, and indeed a whole range of challenges to our interests and values. So sanctions are one of those really vital tools in our toolkit to help us to try and sustain those interests and values. Secondly, a lot has changed, both in how we use sanctions to address those wide-ranging threats, in the way our sanctions for Russia have broken new ground through innovations like the oil price cap, and in how we collaborate with partners and how we implement and indeed enforce sanctions. So from the passing of our landmark Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act, SAMLAR, which is easier to say, back in 2018, through to the launch of just a few months ago of our Office of Trade Sanctions Implementation, the strategy is setting out the strides we've made in developing and deploying, really importantly, the UK's sanction capability so far. Third, and perhaps most important of all, We want to be clear, and for everyone else to understand why we're clear and what the fundamentals are. Our sanctions are built on strong foundations. We decide when and where to use sanctions based on clear objectives and principles. So our sanctions are designed to deter and to disrupt malign behaviour, but they're also to demonstrate commitment to our values. So we seek to shift the behaviour of the actors we target and at the same time to send a wider message. Now, we recognise that sanctions are not necessarily the right tool to reach in every context. Indeed, sanctions work best not in isolation, but of course as part of wider efforts with our UK partners and alongside other tools. So as well as using UN sanctions where we can, we do not shy away from taking actions using UK autonomous regimes when we consider that to be necessary and impactful. It is, of course, incumbent on us as the UK government to use our sanctions both lawfully and responsibly. We uphold due process. We enable legal challenge as cornerstones of a fair, open and transparent system. And we mitigate unintended consequences, whether by excluding food and medicine from trade sanctions, for instance, or by granting licences for vital humanitarian work. And we know that our sanctions are having an impact. They are denying revenue and arms to the Kremlin. Without the international sanctions that we have all brought in, we estimate that Russia would have over $400 billion more to fund its war machine. That's equivalent to another 4 years of funding for Russia's invasion. So that's effective sanctions doing what they should. And now we know that Russia, of course, is striving to work around our sanctions, aided by some third countries. So we continue to redouble our efforts to address this, putting the pressure on those enablers and those back channels who think that we can't see them. And with our partners, in line with international law, we continue to pursue all possible ways to unlock the value of immobilised Russian sovereign assets in order to support Ukraine. Now, unfortunately, our sanctions remain all too necessary well beyond the Russia context. We have used sanctions following Iranian state threats on UK soil against the Houthi rebels and against Hamas, as well as to help tackle the violence of extremist settlers in the West Bank. We have sanctioned malign cyber actors from groups that targeted UK schools and hospitals, entities propping up the brutal Myanmar military regime, and those undermining peace and security in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We're using sanctions to defend human rights worldwide, including targeting perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence. So it's a broad mix, and the team are very busy. Ultimately, as the strategy makes clear, our efforts are only as effective as our partnerships. And that's why we see sanctions as a team effort, with the UK government as an active team player. Banks, businesses and other stakeholders, many of you here represented today, are at the front line of sanctions, and we absolutely rely on that collaboration and feedback from you to achieve those robust sanctions compliance and to be able to continue to improve sanctions design. Now, of course, that international collaboration is absolutely key. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, for instance, our collective unity and resolve has been stronger than ever and continues to be. We work hand in glove with the US, with the EU, with G7 partners, but importantly and beyond, to maximise the collective impact that sanctions can have. We join up our efforts to tackle those who seek to circumvent those sanctions, and we draw on each other's expertise. These partnerships are crucial to our efforts to make sure that sanctions continue to bite. Now, I hope, as you've all read the document, you will have noted the Foreign Secretary's set out in his foreword in the strategy that we are preparing and announcing sanctions in the UK as one pillar, if you like, but we are making sure that they're followed through, and that's a whole other piece of work. And I just want to underline, this is actually a whole of government effort. The Prime Minister launched our Economic Deterrence Initiative last year, providing £50 million to help us invest in our cross-government structures really significantly, as well as in our ability to collect intelligence, investigate breaches, and of course impose penalties. I mentioned the new Office of Trade Sanctions Implementation, and they are now starting to be able to really follow through on those trade sanctions. We've also strengthened our Joint Maritime Security Centre, a small group of brilliant analysts down in Portsmouth who have world-class, genuinely world-class, cutting-edge research that is able to enhance sanctions enforcement across the maritime sector, including, and they are in great demand from many countries, helping to detect those that are contravening the oil price cap. These are really world-leading groups that we've now built and invested in and will continue to do so to make sure that we can not only bring in sanctions policy that is thought through and impactful, but make sure that we can hold those to account who are sanctioned. And I think just lastly, that really, really important part of this team effort, really to recognise that many of you here today are indeed partners with whom we have worked very closely and in many cases for many years. And thank you for your commitment to helping our teams be able to do that, because for as long as sanctions remain necessary, so too will our important relationships, the partnerships and the collaboration that help us to bring in the right sanctions and in order to make sure that they're delivered and that they work on the ground. So thank you to all of you for all that you do. I'm afraid there's more to do. I fear that the world we continue to live in will require more of this, to use this tool to make sure people understand that we are serious in standing up to these bullies and criminals. We need to keep our people safe, and we need to make sure that people everywhere can feel the benefits of all that we are doing and all that you are doing with us to help build a safer and more peaceful and indeed importantly a more prosperous future, protecting economic security for people everywhere. And the UK, we believe, has a really strong and important leadership role in setting the bar, helping others to see and work with us to meet that, because we have got to be responsible for helping everybody hold those who breach these basic rules to account. Thank you.
Minister, well, thank you very much. As you say, the strategy does a very good job in covering all the bases, an end-to-end description, and sets out the UK's approach. In some ways, it almost makes it easier to use the sanctions tool. So my question really is there a risk that we may use sanctions too much? And what is the best, given there are costs involved, unintended consequences, but also other costs. What is the best way to avoid doing that? What are the ways we can guard against that risk?
So I think that's a fair challenge. The team would have to work 36 hours a day to be able to provide, I think, more. There's a number of things. So it is one of the tools in the box, but it is a powerful tool if it's done in concert with other friends and allies. Individual sanctions are fine, and we might choose to use that on a particular, criminal gang or that sort of thing where it's a UK issue. But when we're dealing with these really monstrous, global challenges to the order that we want to see, we have to work in concert with friends and allies to have the impact that we really need to. So I think that is a limiting factor, because getting, large groups, G7, EU, all of us together to agree slows the process down, but also challenges us all to make sure that we are not, as I said, inadvertently creating some kind of erroneous path as well. So I think that's an important one. But I think also we choose to make them selective in order to make the point where we can have an impact. So if you're looking at individual sanctions, for instance, on IRGC guards, we will pick a cohort where we have very strong evidence, obviously very important to us, because, as I say, we are very happy to be challenged in court, because we are robust in how we make our sanction. But we are also sending that message, which is this behaviour is unacceptable. But we will do it in a selective way, which ensures that our message is clearly heard, that we are targeting those most clearly in breach of whether they're human rights or economic threats, so that the message is clear. But I think the combination of selectively choosing those where the UK can have an impact, invariably, so sometimes we will do them where perhaps there's a lot of UK assets because it's a very strong human right message, but actually the impact is often on, at an individual level, on being able to stop that UK access that was otherwise being abused.
Right. Thank you. So in a sense, although it may take a bit more time, actually having that bit more time makes sure that we use it in the most appropriate way.
Definitely.
I mean, I wanted to come up actually on a point you just flagged. So we have the rubric: deter, disrupt, and demonstrate. So I don't know how long it took someone to come up with the 3 Ds.
You'll have to ask them later.
But it works very well. The deter I really get. You understand that. Disrupt is very clear. Demonstrate, I find a bit harder to unpack. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about exactly what underlies the concept of demonstrate, and in particular, I can see that if a state or a country does something that is really off the mark, one can make a ministerial speech, declaration.
Yeah, indeed.
If you impose sanctions, that adds, in a sense, to your, the force of what you're trying to signal. On the other hand, particularly in circumstances where the impact may be quite minimal, the actual impact on that individual, or very hard to discern, it means that you add to the narrative, well, sanctions don't work, because you have these demonstrating sanctions, and it's very hard to see what impact they've had. So could you say a bit more about how you see that demonstrate element in the strategy working?
So I think a number of things. I think they're not, they're not 3 separate pillars in that sense, in that they can have, those 3 have the multiplier effect of why we would pick to, do a sanction on an individual or a country or an entity in that sense. But it's about, that demonstrate is about setting the UK's position very clearly. So we may well also be disrupting an economic flow or other behaviours, but it's that we feel strongly enough, exactly to your point, so we have a hierarchy. So there's an official statement might be made, bad, could you not do that again? Probably not listening, but we're going to make the point anyway. Ministerial statement, as you say, which is, do you know what, we're actually really not impressed and we think this is completely out of order. But the next stage after that is, well, diplomacy is about, using language and persuasion, but sometimes you need to, make the punishment a little further than, I heard you, but I don't care, in the same way that you might, tell off a child. There comes a point when, repeated bad behaviour needs to be called out. And the UK is very comfortable. We have a very clear set of values, the freedoms we consider to be inalienable for all, not just our citizens, but we would like all citizens across the world to have them, and we will stand up. And the sanction becomes that next level of demonstrating where we feel that an organisation or a state has crossed a line beyond which we cannot just sit and say, oh dear, tut, that's not good. The sanction is a tool that affords us the opportunity to really demonstrate, put our money where our mouth is, because we may well have to take some reciprocal sanctions or financial impact as a result. But it's too important to us, and we know, and I'm very proud of being, a UK minister, that around the world our word and our actions are respected by many, many others who perhaps don't feel they have as much agency to step out in the front line themselves. So we often, will lead the way, and others will then quietly roll in behind us and be able to feel that they too can stand up for whatever that particular instance is, and they're not on their own. So I think we feel it's important, not only because we believe that there are lines beyond which states or organisations shouldn't go without punishment in delivery, but also because I know, because people tell me as I travel the world, they're grateful when we step up first.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I won't surprise you when I put this question, but there's an enormous debate going on around the question of whether the G7 should confiscate assets, state assets in particular, that it's permanently sanctioned. This is obviously in relation to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a very large amount of state assets, 350 billion plus, that have currently been sanctioned. And the UK strategy says, and indeed you said in your speech, the government is pursuing all lawful routes through which sanctioned Russian assets can be used to support Ukraine, which is fine as far as it goes. But does that mean that the UK would actually change the law if that were necessary in order to deploy those assets in a way that it felt was appropriate?
So exactly as you say, and as I said across the whole piece, much more effective if we work as a team, especially when you're working, to try and sanction and punish a state that's, illegally invaded its neighbour. So at a G7 and EU level, that is very much where all our specialists have been working together. We all have different legal systems. We, come from different countries are holding larger or smaller amounts of these frozen assets to try and see if there's a way through to be able to help shift those funds, seize those funds, different languages used by different countries in different ways, but, take those funds permanently away from Russian hands to be able to put to effect to help Ukraine's reconstruction. So those discussions have been going on. Huge amount of work from all parties. And I'm hopeful that at the next G7 we'll be able to see some progress in that. I think the important issue is that no one is in any mindset that says it'll be fine, Russia's having it back. The challenge is that they're frozen, and that is very important because it has restricted with all those that wrap around those financial sanctions, Russia's ability to be able to engage financially, and that's helpful. But of course, we see circumvention elsewhere, where those who are, not as committed to the question of sovereignty as those of us who have led in that space. So I think there is a lot of work going on. The answer will be what everyone can, collectively feel we can step forwards on at this point. And I've been hugely impressed by the amount of genuine, legal and political effort being put behind this to try and find a solution to move it as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. Well, Minister, I know you have another engagement to go to, but if I may put just one final question. Actually, throughout your speech and throughout the sanction, you've emphasised the importance of partnership with other countries, partnership with the private sector. And the strategy says that the government is committed to investing more, particularly with its engagement with the private sector. But I think everybody here, private sector, would be very interested to know, in what kind of directions that will take you. I think there's also, I used to work on anti-money laundering in years gone by, and it's another kind of area where this public-private relationship is crucial. And there's a question really whether there are any lessons you can learn from that, particularly in terms of how you can, if you like, use the private sector's effort most effectively to achieve the goals you want, which one can apply in the area of sanctions implementation.
Completely, we don't do this in isolation at all. I have a brilliant team, but they simply couldn't be watching the whole world and seeing, misbehaviour going on. So we are absolutely reliant and want to be working with partners, whether that's NGOs, banks, lawyers, the whole cohort, and businesses. I've been fascinated by, when Putin invaded in, 2022, and there was this extraordinary, so we brought in some immediate trade sanctions. I was trade secretary at the time, so immediate trade sanctions. And we had this clamour, it's the only word I can describe it, clamour from businesses going, what mustn't we do? We absolutely want to stand, in concert with the Ukrainians. What mustn't we do? And we had to set up a hotline, and businesses would phone in and say, well, I've got this supply chain with this. Is that bad? Should I stop it? Where could I go? It was the most amazing commitment from UK business to support, at that point, what was just a sort of very first line of, demonstrating our fury. And that has continued, but that relationship is critically important, and where circumvention happens, because by definition, if you're Russia or Russia's supporters, you're going to try and find ways to continue to fuel their side of the war machine. We absolutely rely on all those partners who are eyes and ears, across the world. To help us to see. So they often, and I'm often challenged, I was in front of the Foreign Affairs Committee last week, and the challenge is always, more, faster, Minister. And I said, well, you give me as much information as evidence as you can, and my team and I will go away and look at it. But you know what? I'm not going to tell you whether what you gave me was enough, or indeed whether it was right, we will go and do the legwork and check and work out if A, there's value in it, B, we've got evidence that we think would hold up in court. That's really important to us. I'm not going to allow us to put sanctions through that are not robust, because that's the point. They've got to hold up, they've got to be enforceable. And so give us as much as you can, anything you can see. That is what we need to help us really try and keep on top of not only those big blanket lines that we drew early on, but that continuing cycle of activity. The mission is to restrict and crush Putin's ability to continue to fuel and fund his war. We will look at everything that might help us to do that. But if we look more widely, in our human rights and our other, anti-monetary laundering, all of those issues, there are bad people out there trying to get around the system, trying to abuse, workers and all sorts. Those are the tools that we have, and if we can evidence it and we can bring forward legislation that we know will hold up, and we've had some fantastic test cases gone through recently and they've all held up, and all credit to the team for that effort, then we will continue to do that. So it absolutely is a team effort. What frustrates my colleagues is that it all comes into the bottom, they don't get to see what we do with it. But you know what? You have to trust us. We have an amazing, amazing team who are 110% focused, and I hope in the strategy we've set out just how that framework of evidence and effort is brought together, but also how we're strengthening those enforcement teams to ensure that if you've been sanctioned, you're not going to get away with it.
Well, Minister, I know you have to go to another appointment, so thank you so much for being with us and for answering my questions. Thank you very much. So now we'll move to the next phase.